Some secrets don't destroy you the moment you see them. They destroy you the moment someone powerful realizes you saw them. Amara Bennett's hands trembled slightly as she carried the silver tray through the silent hallway of the Castellano estate, the crystal glasses rattling softly against each other with every careful step. Midnight had wrapped the mansion in an eerie stillness, the kind that made every shadow feel alive. She should have been asleep an hour ago. Every member of the staff knew the rules after 10 p.m. Stay inside your quarters. Avoid the East Wing. Never ask questions. But Mrs. Romano, the elderly housekeeper, had forgotten her medication downstairs, and Amara had volunteered to retrieve it before the old woman's coughing fit became worse. She kept her eyes lowered as she moved through the marble corridor, passing towering windows that overlooked the dark Chicago skyline glittering beneath freezing rain. The Castellano mansion felt less like a home at night and more like a fortress holding its breath. Then she heard it, a muffled sound beneath the floorboards. Not loud, not screaming, just a strained voice somewhere below her feet, followed by the low murmur of a man speaking calmly enough to send ice through her veins. Amara froze. The tray nearly slipped from her fingers. Every instinct told her to walk away. Fast. But curiosity, dangerous and human, pulled her toward the narrow service hallway near the library. She had cleaned this mansion for 4 months and never once noticed the hidden door behind the wine shelves. Tonight it stood slightly open. Warm light spilled across the polished floor. Amara swallowed hard. Her heartbeat hammered inside her ears as she stepped closer. One glance, she told herself. Just one. The hidden staircase descended into a dim underground room lined with dark wood and amber lighting. Men in black suits stood motionless near the walls like statues carved from shadow. In the center of the room stood Damien Castellano himself. Even from above, his presence dominated everything around him. 6'3", broad shoulders beneath a charcoal dress shirt with the sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms. A silver watch gleamed beneath the light as he rested one hand against the leather chair in front of him. His face was calm. Too calm. That was the terrifying part. Not anger. Not shouting. Just complete control. The man seated across from him looked pale and shaken, his expensive suit wrinkled, his eyes darting nervously toward the guards nearby. Damien tilted his head slightly, listening to something the man said in a trembling voice. Then the Mafia Boss spoke softly, almost gently. You had every opportunity to tell me the truth. The room fell silent again. Amara's breath caught in her throat. She should leave. Right now? Before anyone noticed her. But as she stepped backward, the sole of her shoe brushed against the wooden shelf behind her with a faint scraping sound. Tiny, barely audible. Yet every man downstairs looked up instantly. Amara's blood turned cold. Damien Castellano lifted his eyes toward the staircase, and for the first time since she started working at the mansion, the most dangerous man in Chicago looked directly at her. Really looked at her. The world seemed to stop moving. Slowly, Damien handed something to the guard beside him before climbing the stairs himself, one measured step at a time. Amara couldn't breathe, couldn't move. By the time he reached her, the scent of cedar and expensive cologne surrounded her completely. Up close, he was even more intimidating than the rumors whispered by the kitchen staff. Sharp jawline, pale blue eyes, a face carved from cold patience and sleepless nights. He studied her silently while rain tapped against the distant windows upstairs. Amara lowered her gaze immediately. I'm sorry, sir, she whispered. I didn't mean to. Look at me. His voice was quiet. She obeyed before she could stop herself. Damien stared into her eyes for a long moment, as though searching for fear, betrayal, or weakness hidden somewhere beneath them. But when he finally spoke, his tone changed completely. Softer somehow. More dangerous. You saw something that doesn't leave this house, he said. Amara's fingers tightened around the silver tray until the metal shook. I won't tell anyone. Another long silence followed. Then Damien reached out slowly and closed the hidden door behind him with one hand. Click. The sound echoed through the empty hallway like the lock of a prison cell. I know, he said calmly. Because you belong to me now. Amara Bennett did not sleep that night. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed inside her small staff room while cold rain streaked across the tiny window overlooking the back gardens of the Castellano estate. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Damien Castellano standing beneath the amber lights of that hidden basement, calm, and unreadable, while powerful men obeyed him without question. But worse than the basement was the way he had looked at her afterward. Like she was no longer separate from his world. Like some invisible door had closed behind her forever. At 6 o'clock sharp, the mansion came alive again with the quiet rhythm of wealth. Coffee brewed downstairs. Security radios crackled softly through hidden earpieces. Housekeepers moved through marble hallways carrying fresh towels and pressed linens. Normally, Amara disappeared into that routine easily. Invisible. Safe. But the moment she stepped out of her room, she realized something had changed. One of the guards standing near the staircase straightened immediately when he saw her. Another lowered his phone and watched her walk past. Not suspiciously. Carefully. Like she suddenly mattered. The feeling sent unease curling through her stomach. In the kitchen, Mrs. Romano glanced toward her with wide eyes before quickly looking away again. Nobody spoke. Nobody smiled. Even the younger staff members who usually whispered gossip over breakfast avoided meeting her gaze completely. Amara poured herself coffee with shaking hands. "Did something happen?" she asked quietly. Mrs. Romano nearly dropped a spoon into the sink. "No questions," the older woman whispered sharply without turning around. "For your own good, child." Before Amara could respond, one of the guards entered the kitchen. He wore a dark tailored suit with an earpiece tucked against his jaw. "Mr. Castellano requested breakfast in the East dining room," he said calmly. "Miss Bennett will deliver it personally." The entire kitchen froze. Amara's pulse stumbled. In 4 months, Damien Castellano had never once acknowledged her existence directly. Other staff handled his meals. Other staff cleaned his office. The Mafia Boss liked distance between himself and the people who worked for him. Until last night. Mrs. Romano handed Amara the silver tray with nervous hands. Fresh fruit, black coffee, toast. Everything arranged perfectly on expensive porcelain plates that probably cost more than her monthly paycheck. "Keep your eyes down," the old woman whispered. "And do not speak unless he asks you something." Amara nodded weakly before walking toward the east wing. The mansion felt colder this morning. Massive oil paintings lined the walls beside towering windows where gray Chicago light spilled across polished marble floors. 2 guards opened the dining room doors for her without a word. Damien Castellano sat alone near the far end of the 20-foot table, reading documents beside a half-finished cup of espresso. Sunlight caught the silver cufflinks at his wrists while dark city rain clouds loomed behind him through floor-to-ceiling windows. Even sitting down, he radiated complete control. Amara lowered the tray carefully onto the table. "Your breakfast, sir." Damien did not answer immediately. He finished reading one line on the paper before finally lifting his eyes toward her. Pale blue, sharp enough to cut through bone. "Did you sleep?" he asked quietly. The question caught her off guard. "Not really, sir." A faint expression crossed his face. Not amusement. Something quieter. "I expected that." Amara swallowed hard. "Sir, about last night. I swear I did not mean to see anything." Damien folded the document slowly and set it aside. "But you did." Silence settled heavily between them. Somewhere outside, thunder rolled over the city skyline. Amara kept her hands clasped tightly together to hide their trembling. "Am I in danger?" she finally whispered. Damien leaned back slightly in his chair, studying her with terrifying calm. "If you were," he said softly, "you would not be standing here." That answer should have comforted her. Somehow it did the opposite. He motioned toward the untouched plate. "Beside the tray. Sit down and eat." Amara blinked in confusion. "Sir, you have not eaten since yesterday afternoon." Her breath caught. He noticed that? Damien reached for his coffee without looking away from her. "In this house," he said quietly, "I notice everything." And for the first time since arriving at the mansion, Amara realized the most frightening thing about Damien Castellano was not his power. It was his attention. By evening, the entire mansion seemed to understand something Amara Bennett still could not fully explain. She noticed it in the silence that followed her through the hallways. In the way security guards stepped aside for her now instead of ignoring her existence completely. In the nervous glances exchanged between staff members whenever Damien Castellano entered a room and found her nearby. Nobody said anything directly. They did not have to. Fear traveled through wealthy houses differently than ordinary places. Quietly, like perfume lingering in the air long after someone dangerous had walked away. At 7:30 that night, Mrs. Romano approached Amara outside the laundry room with pale tension in her face. "You are needed upstairs," she whispered carefully. "East dining room again." Amara's stomach tightened immediately. "For dinner." The older woman nodded once. "And child," she added softly, gripping Amara's wrist for just a second, "do not refuse him." 20 minutes later, Amara stood outside the massive dining room doors trying to steady her breathing. She had changed out of her cleaning uniform into the plain black dress all female staff wore for formal dinners. It was simple, conservative, long sleeves, soft black fabric that contrasted against her dark skin and natural curls pulled neatly into a low bun. Still, she felt painfully out of place, surrounded by the golden glow of chandeliers and walls lined with paintings worth millions of dollars. One of the guards opened the door silently. The room inside looked less like dinner and more like a gathering of kings. Men in tailored suits sat around the enormous table beneath crystal lighting, their low conversations stopping the instant Amara entered. Some were older, with silver hair and expensive watches gleaming beneath rolled cuffs. Others looked younger but colder somehow, their tattooed hands resting near glasses of whiskey and untouched plates of food. Every single one of them turned toward her at once. And at the center of the table sat Damien Castellano. His charcoal suit fit him perfectly, the dark fabric emphasizing the broadness of his shoulders as he leaned back slightly in his chair, one hand resting near a glass of bourbon. Unlike the others, he did not seem surprised by her arrival. He had expected her. "Come here, Amara," he said calmly. Hearing her first name spoken in that room made her pulse jump. Slowly, she approached the table while dozens of eyes followed her every movement. Damien gestured toward the empty seat beside him. Not across from him. Beside him. The room went completely silent. Amara hesitated. "Sir, I should probably return to the kitchen." Damien lifted his eyes toward her slowly. "Sit." The single word carried absolute authority. She obeyed before fear could stop her. The chair beside him felt too close. Too intimate. She could smell cedar and expensive cologne again beneath the faint scent of whiskey lingering in the air around him. Across the table, one of the older men studied her carefully before finally speaking. "This is the girl?" he asked. Damien did not look away from Amara when he answered. "Yes." Another silence followed. Heavy. Evaluating. Amara kept her hands folded tightly in her lap, while confusion twisted inside her chest. Why was she here? Why were these men looking at her like she suddenly mattered? A younger man with slick dark hair leaned back in his chair with visible amusement. "Interesting choice," he muttered. Damien's expression did not change. "Watch your tone, Victor." The temperature in the room shifted instantly. Victor straightened without another word. Amara blinked in surprise. Nobody challenged Damien Castellano. Nobody even breathed too loudly around him. Yet he had defended her without hesitation. A server entered quietly carrying another plate and set it before Amara with nervous hands. She stared down at the expensive meal in disbelief. "Eat," Damien said, softly beside her. "You are shaking." She had not even realized he noticed. Amara picked up the fork carefully while every man at the table continued watching her with strange fascination. Finally, one of them spoke again in a low voice. "Does she know who you are?" Damien took a slow sip of bourbon before answering. "She knows enough." Then his pale blue eyes shifted toward Amara once more, calm and unreadable beneath the chandelier light. "And she is under my protection now." The room fell silent again. But this time, it was not fear Amara felt crawling beneath her skin. It was the terrifying realization that every person at that table had just accepted Damien Castellano's words as law. After that dinner, the rules of Amara Bennett's life changed without anyone ever explaining them out loud. The next morning, she discovered her employee access card no longer worked at the front gates of the estate. When she tried using her phone during breakfast, there was no signal anywhere inside the mansion. Even the wireless internet that staff normally shared had disappeared from her devices completely. At first she thought it was a mistake. Then she noticed the guard standing near the front entrance watching her carefully the moment she approached the doors. "There is a problem with the system," he said politely before she could even ask. "Mr. Castellano has already been informed." His tone sounded respectful. Too respectful. Amara slowly lowered her phone back into her pocket. Nothing about this felt accidental. By noon, she realized she was no longer cleaning the ordinary sections of the mansion either. Instead of laundry duty or guest rooms, Mrs. Romano quietly reassigned her upstairs near Damien's private wing. The older woman avoided eye contact the entire time. "I do not understand what is happening," Amara whispered while folding fresh towels inside the linen closet. Mrs. Romano's tired face softened briefly. "Child," she murmured carefully, "men like Damien Castellano do not protect people halfway." Before Amara could ask what that meant, footsteps echoed through the hallway outside. Heavy, controlled. Every employee nearby instantly straightened their posture. Damien appeared moments later wearing a dark overcoat over a black dress shirt, rainwater still glistening faintly against the fabric from the storm outside. Two security men followed several feet behind him before stopping completely once he reached Amara. Damien dismissed them with a single glance. Suddenly, they were alone. The hallway felt too small with him standing there. Too quiet. Amara lowered her eyes immediately. "Sir." Damien studied the folded towels in her hands for a moment before speaking. "You tried leaving the property this morning." It was not a question. Amara's throat tightened. "I only wanted to call my sister. You may call her tonight." His voice remained calm. From the house line, her confusion deepened. "Why are you doing this?" Damien stepped closer slowly, his expensive shoes silent against the marble floor. "Because people know you saw something important." "I did not even understand what I saw." "That does not matter." The quiet certainty in his voice sent unease through her chest again. Damien glanced briefly toward the nearby windows where gray rain streaked against the glass. "In my world," he said softly, "information is more dangerous than weapons." Amara hugged the towels slightly tighter against herself. "So, I am a prisoner now?" For the first time, Damien's expression shifted. Barely. A flicker of irritation crossed his face before disappearing just as quickly. "If you were a prisoner," he replied calmly, "you would not be speaking to me this way." Silence stretched between them again. Somewhere downstairs, faint piano music drifted through the mansion from hidden speakers. Damien reached past her suddenly toward the shelf behind her, close enough that Amara caught the warmth of his cologne again beneath the cold scent of rain. Her breath caught instantly. He simply adjusted one of the folded towels that had slipped unevenly from the stack. Such a small gesture should not have unsettled her the way it did. But nothing about Damien Castellano felt ordinary. "There are rules now," he said quietly without stepping away. "You stay inside the estate unless I approve otherwise. You tell security before going anywhere on the property. And if someone you do not recognize approaches you, you walk away immediately." Amara looked up at him in disbelief. "You really think I am in danger?" Damien's pale blue eyes locked onto hers. "I know you are." The honesty in that answer frightened her more than any threat could have. He straightened slightly then, every trace of softness disappearing behind the cold authority she had seen downstairs in the hidden room. "One more thing," he added. "No one touches you without my permission." Amara stared at him silently, unsure whether the words felt protective or possessive. Maybe both. Damien held her gaze for one long moment before turning away down the marble hallway. But just before disappearing around the corner, he stopped briefly without looking back. "Eat dinner tonight," he said calmly. "You skipped lunch again." Then he walked away, leaving Amara standing frozen beneath the chandelier light, with one terrifying realization echoing through her mind. Damien Castellano was watching her constantly. The storm over Chicago grew worse 3 nights later. Rain slammed against the massive windows of the Castellano estate, while distant thunder rolled across the skyline like warning drums. Most of the staff had already retreated to their quarters by 11 o'clock, but Amara Bennett remained awake inside the upstairs laundry room, folding freshly pressed dress shirts beneath the soft yellow glow of a single lamp. Sleep had become difficult lately. Every hallway felt watched. Every silence inside the mansion carried hidden meaning now. And no matter how hard she tried, she could not stop thinking about Damien Castellano, about the strange contradiction living inside him, a man feared by everyone around him who somehow noticed whether she skipped lunch. The sound of heavy footsteps suddenly echoed somewhere down the corridor outside. Fast, urgent, then voices, low and tense. Amara looked up immediately. One of the guards rushed past the laundry room doorway holding a medical kit in his hand. Another followed close behind him. Fear tightened instantly inside her chest. Something had happened. Before she could stop herself, Amara stepped into the hallway. "What is going on?" she asked quietly. Neither guard answered, but the look exchanged between them told her enough. "Damien." Amara's heart stumbled. Without thinking, she followed the direction they had gone, her soft shoes silent against the marble floors as thunder shook the mansion again. The doors to Damien's private study stood partially open upstairs. Warm light spilled into the dark hallway. She slowed near the entrance, unsure whether she should continue. Then she heard his voice. Calm. Controlled. "I said I am fine." Another man answered nervously. "Sir, the doctor should still examine that shoulder." "I do not need a doctor." Amara hesitated only a second longer before quietly stepping closer to the doorway. Damien stood near the fireplace with his back partially turned toward the room. His black dress shirt clung slightly to one shoulder where rainwater darkened the fabric. One sleeve had been rolled carelessly to his elbow, revealing strong forearms marked with faint scars and expensive silver cufflinks hanging loose from one wrist. 3 men stood nearby, looking deeply uncomfortable. Damien glanced toward the doorway the moment Amara appeared. The entire room immediately went silent. One of the guards looked horrified to see her there, but Damien simply watched her calmly beneath the low amber light of the study. "Everyone out," he said quietly. The men obeyed instantly. Within seconds, the enormous room belonged only to the two of them. Rain battered the windows behind him while the fire crackled softly nearby. Amara swallowed hard. "I did not mean to interrupt." Damien removed the cufflink slowly from his wrist and placed it onto the desk beside him. "You should be asleep." "So should you." The answer slipped out before she could stop it. For a moment, something almost resembling amusement touched the corner of his mouth. Almost. Then he moved slightly, and Amara noticed the faint stain near his shoulder beneath the dark fabric. Not dramatic, but enough to tell her he was hurt. Her expression changed immediately. "You are injured." Damien glanced down briefly as though the thought barely interested him. "It is nothing." "That is not nothing." Silence settled between them again. Finally, Damien looked back at her with that same unnerving attention that always made her pulse race. "Are you always this stubborn?" he asked softly. Amara ignored the question and stepped closer instead. "You should at least clean it properly." One slow second passed. Then another. Damien could have refused her easily. Everyone in the city obeyed him without question. Yet instead, he walked toward the leather chair near the fireplace and sat down without taking his eyes off her. "Fine," he said quietly. 5 minutes. Amara retrieved the untouched medical kit from the desk with trembling fingers before kneeling carefully beside him. Up close, the tension in the room became almost unbearable. She could hear the steady rhythm of rain outside, smell cedar, smoke, and expensive cologne surrounding him. Her hands shook slightly as she opened the kit. Damien noticed immediately. "Are you afraid of me, Amara?" The question came softly. Honestly, she paused for a moment before answering. "Sometimes." Another flash of lightning illuminated the study windows. Damien leaned back slightly in the chair, watching her with unreadable blue eyes. "Good," he murmured. "That means you are paying attention." But when Amara gently cleaned the injury near his shoulder with careful hands, Damien Castellano closed his eyes briefly for the very first time since she had met him. And somehow, seeing the most powerful man in Chicago let his guard down for even a second felt far more dangerous than fear. The next morning, Amara Bennett woke to sunlight spilling softly across her room for the first time in days. The storm had finally passed during the night, leaving the skies above Chicago cold and painfully clear. Yet something inside the mansion felt different now. Quieter. As if the walls themselves were holding their breath after what had happened in Damien Castellano's study. She kept replaying the moment in her mind while dressing for work. The way he had closed his eyes briefly while she treated his shoulder. The way his voice had softened whenever he spoke directly to her. None of it made sense. Men like Damien Castellano were not supposed to trust people, especially not someone like her. Downstairs, the kitchen buzzed with unusual activity. Several staff members hurried between counters carrying trays of pastries and silver coffee sets, while security moved through the hallways more frequently than normal. Amara tied her apron quietly and reached for a stack of plates when Mrs. Romano appeared beside her. "Take these upstairs to the West Conference Room," the older woman whispered. "The boss's guests." Amara nodded automatically before lifting the tray. But when she reached the second floor, She slowed near the partially open conference room doors after hearing children laughing inside. Not nervous laughter. Real laughter. Warm and unguarded. She blinked in surprise. Inside the room sat Damien Castellano at the far end of a long table surrounded not by dangerous men in dark suits, but by 6 children no older than 10, wearing school uniforms and winter coats. One little boy sat beside Damien holding a tablet, while another girl colored quietly with crayons spread across expensive documents. Amara stood frozen in the hallway. Damien looked completely different with children around him. Softer somehow. Less sharp. A young girl tugged lightly at his sleeve. "Mr. Castellano, look what I drew." Damien glanced down at the paper in her hands. "That is supposed to be me?" he asked dryly. The child grinned proudly. "You look scary in real life, too." To Amara's complete shock, one corner of Damien's mouth actually lifted. Not the cold, almost smile she had seen before. A real one. Brief. Human. "Honest kid," he muttered. One of the women seated nearby noticed Amara first and smiled kindly. "You can bring the tray in, sweetheart." Amara entered slowly, still trying to understand what she was seeing. The room walls displayed architectural plans and charity event photographs she had never noticed before. One large poster read, "Castellano Youth Housing Initiative." Another displayed drawings made by children beside framed photographs of renovated apartment buildings on Chicago's South Side. Damien's eyes lifted toward Amara as she set the tray down carefully. "Thank you," he said quietly. The children immediately rushed toward the pastries. A little girl with braided pigtails paused near Amara and smiled brightly. "Mr. Castellano bought us new coats yesterday," she whispered excitedly. "Mine has pockets inside the pockets." Amara stared at the child speechlessly. Across the room, Damien watched the interaction silently while adjusting his cufflinks. The woman seated beside him finally spoke. "Most people think he only owns nightclubs and hotels," she said with faint amusement. "They never talk about the shelters." Damien's expression hardened instantly. "Because it is not their business." The woman only smiled knowingly before gathering the children toward the elevators. Within minutes, the room emptied until only Amara and Damien remained again beneath the soft morning light pouring through the windows. She turned toward him slowly. "You fund all of this?" Damien gathered several folders into neat stacks before answering. "A few programs. For children. For families." His voice remained calm, but Amara noticed something shift behind his eyes when he looked toward one of the abandoned drawings left on the table. A small apartment building beneath a bright yellow sun. "There are neighborhoods in this city where children disappear every week," he said quietly. "People with money pretend not to notice because the victims are poor." Amara's chest tightened. The hidden basement flashed through her memory again. The terrified man in the chair. Damien glanced toward her slowly. "The man you saw downstairs," he said, "was selling information that put those children in danger." Silence filled the room. Suddenly, the world no longer looked as simple as she thought it was. Damien Castellano was still dangerous. Everyone around him feared him for a reason. But standing there beneath the cold Chicago sunlight, Amara realized something even more unsettling. The most feared man in the city might also be protecting people no one else cared enough to save. For the next 2 days, Amara Bennett tried convincing herself that learning the truth about Damien Castellano changed nothing. He was still the most feared man in Chicago. Men still lowered their voices when he entered a room. Guards still followed her through the mansion with careful eyes. And every locked door inside the estate still reminded her that freedom existed somewhere beyond the iron gates she could no longer cross alone. But despite everything, something inside her had shifted. She noticed it whenever Damien passed her in the hallway, and his cold expression softened almost imperceptibly. She noticed it when he ordered fresh coffee brought to the library before she even realized she was tired. Most frightening of all, she noticed it in herself. Because she had stopped feeling afraid every second he stood near her, which meant she was beginning to trust him. And that terrified her more than anything. That Friday night, the mansion hosted another private meeting downstairs. Expensive cars rolled through the front gates beneath cold winter rain, while security doubled across the estate. Amara remained upstairs, organizing guest rooms, trying to ignore the tension filling the house. Around midnight, she finally slipped into the staff kitchen for tea. The room was empty except for one younger security guard standing near the back entrance scrolling through his phone. He looked up immediately when she entered. Long night? He asked politely. Amara nodded faintly while reaching for a mug. Seems like everyone is tense tonight. The guard hesitated. There are rumors. About what? He glanced toward the hallway before lowering his voice carefully. Some people think Mr. Castellano has become distracted lately. Amara frowned slightly. Distracted? The guard looked uncomfortable instantly, as though he regretted speaking at all. Forget I said anything. Before Amara could ask another question, the kitchen doors suddenly opened behind her. Damien stepped inside wearing a dark overcoat over his black suit, snowflakes melting slowly against the fabric near his shoulders. The air in the room changed immediately. The young guard straightened so fast he nearly dropped his phone. Damien's pale blue eyes moved first toward the guard, then toward Amara. Leave us, he said calmly. The guard obeyed without another word. Silence settled heavily once the doors closed again. Damien removed his leather gloves slowly while watching Amara standing near the counter with her untouched tea. You should not be downstairs alone tonight, he said quietly. I was only making tea. Still, his voice remained calm, but she recognized the warning hidden beneath it now. Amara folded her arms tightly. Everyone keeps telling me I am in danger, but nobody explains anything. Damien walked toward her slowly beneath the warm kitchen lighting. Some explanations put people at greater risk. You do realize that answer is incredibly frustrating. For a second, Damien almost smiled again. Almost. Then his expression faded back into something unreadable. You are angry with me. Should I not be? She asked softly. You control where I go. You monitor everything I do. Half this house acts like I belong to you. The words slipped out before she could stop them. Damien became very still. Snow continued melting quietly from his coat onto the polished floor between them. And what do you think? He asked after a long silence. Amara looked away first. That alone answered too much. Damien stepped closer carefully, not enough to frighten her, but enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him against the cold winter air still clinging to his coat. Amara, he said quietly, if I wanted control, this conversation would sound very different. Her heartbeat quickened. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, too quiet. Somewhere downstairs, faint music drifted upward from the private gathering beneath the mansion. Damien's gaze remained fixed on her face. You still have not understood the situation completely, he murmured. The moment certain people learned you saw that basement, your life changed permanently. Amara swallowed hard. Then let me leave Chicago. The answer came instantly. No, not angry. Not loud. Absolute. Damien looked toward the dark windows briefly before speaking again, softer this time. I can survive enemies. I can survive betrayal. I have done it my entire life. His eyes returned to hers slowly. But if something happened to you because I failed to protect you, he stopped himself abruptly. The unfinished sentence hung between them heavier than any confession. Amara stared at him speechlessly while the storm outside grew louder against the mansion windows. And for the very first time, she realized Damien Castellano was not only afraid for her safety, he was afraid of losing her. Amara Bennett tried to leave the Castellano estate the following afternoon. Not because she hated Damien. That was the problem. She no longer knew how to feel around him. Fear had become tangled with trust, and trust around powerful men was dangerous. Especially men like Damien Castellano. The winter air outside the mansion felt painfully cold against her skin as she stepped through the front gates, carrying only a small black duffel bag and the cash she had saved over the past 4 months. Snow drifted softly across the empty Chicago streets while gray clouds swallowed the skyline overhead. One of the guards noticed her immediately. Miss Bennett, he called carefully. Mr. Castellano did not approve this. Amara tightened her grip on the bag. I am not a prisoner. The guard looked genuinely uncomfortable. Please do not make this difficult. She kept walking. Her heart pounded harder with every step away from the estate. She told herself she was doing the right thing. The farther she stayed from Damien's world, the safer both of them would be. Because no matter what kindness she had seen inside him, danger still followed his name like a shadow. 20 minutes later, Amara sat alone inside the nearly empty downtown train station waiting for the midnight train to Milwaukee. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead while snow swirled against the glass walls outside. She wrapped her coat tighter around herself and stared down at the ticket trembling slightly in her hands. The station smelled like coffee, wet pavement, and cold metal. Ordinary. Safe. Yet something inside her still felt wrong, like she had abandoned something unfinished behind her. A deep, familiar voice suddenly broke through the silence beside her. You should have told me you were leaving. Amara's breath caught instantly. Damien Castellano stood several feet away near the station entrance, his dark overcoat dusted with snowflakes that melted slowly beneath the harsh station lights. No guards. No security team. Just him. Somehow, that frightened her more. Passengers nearby barely noticed the tall man watching her with pale blue eyes sharp enough to stop her heartbeat. Amara stood quickly. How did you find me? Damien slipped one hand into his coat pocket calmly. You stopped hiding the moment you walked into my house. The words should have sounded arrogant. Instead, they sounded exhausted. Amara shook her head slowly. I cannot stay there anymore. Damien walked closer through the empty station, his footsteps quiet against the polished floor. Because of me? Because of your world. Her voice cracked slightly despite her effort to stay calm. Every day I stay near you, I become part of something dangerous. Damien became very still after hearing that. Snowstorm winds howled faintly outside the glass walls while distant train tracks rattled somewhere beyond the station. You think leaving protects you? He asked quietly. It does not. Amara looked away toward the arriving train lights in the distance. Maybe not, but at least I would have my own life back. Silence stretched between them painfully. Then Damien stepped closer than he ever had before, close enough that she could see exhaustion beneath his controlled expression for the first time. Amara, he said softly, look at me. She did. And what she saw there shattered something inside her completely. Not anger. Not control. Fear. Real fear. Damien lowered his voice carefully, as though speaking too loudly might break whatever existed between them now. I can survive bullets. Betrayal. War. I have survived all of it. His jaw tightened briefly before he continued. But if I let you walk away tonight knowing what waits beyond my protection. He stopped, struggling for words for the first time since she had met him. The powerful man who controlled entire rooms suddenly looked unbearably human standing beneath the cold station lights. I would never forgive myself, he finished quietly. Amara stared at him speechlessly while the train slowly approached outside. Damien took one final step closer. Come home, he murmured. Please. The single word hit harder than any command ever could, because Damien Castellano was not ordering her to stay anymore. He was asking. Amara Bennett returned to the Castellano estate before sunrise. Snow still covered the long private driveway in soft white silence as Damien's black car passed through the iron gates without slowing down. Neither of them had spoken much during the drive back from the station. They did not need to. Something between them had changed permanently beneath those cold fluorescent lights downtown. Damien no longer looked at her like someone he needed to control, and Amara no longer looked at him like a man she needed to escape. The mansion stood glowing against the dark winter sky when they arrived, warm golden lights spilling from tall windows onto the snow-covered grounds. Security guards opened the doors immediately the moment Damien stepped out of the car. But what caught Amara off guard was the way every single person glanced at her afterward. Not with pity, not with suspicion. Respect. Quiet. Absolute. Damien noticed it too. He removed his gloves slowly before turning toward her near the front steps. You should sleep, he said softly. Amara nodded faintly, clutching her coat tighter against the cold air. But before she could step inside, another black SUV suddenly rolled through the gates at dangerous speed. The mood shifted instantly. Guards moved forward, hands pressed discreetly against hidden earpieces. Damien's entire posture hardened beside her. A tall man stepped out of the vehicle wearing a dark gray coat and an expression full of barely hidden hostility. Older than Damien. Sharper somehow. His eyes landed directly on Amara. So the rumors are true, the man said coldly. You brought her back. Amara felt tension ripple through every guard nearby. Damien stepped slightly in front of her without hesitation. This is not your concern, Lorenzo. The older man laughed once without humor. Everything connected to this family is my concern. His gaze returned toward Amara again, calculating and cruel. A maid sees sensitive information, and suddenly she is sleeping under your protection? You are losing perspective. The air turned deadly quiet. Snow drifted softly across the estate grounds while distant city lights shimmered beyond the gates below the hill. Damien's expression remained perfectly calm, which somehow made him more terrifying. Careful, he said quietly. Lorenzo scoffed. For her? Or for me? No one moved. No one even breathed too loudly. Then Damien took one slow step forward. You will speak to her respectfully, he said in the same controlled voice Amara had heard in the hidden basement that first night. Or you will leave my property immediately. Lorenzo stared at him in disbelief. You are choosing this girl over your own blood. Damien did not look away. I am choosing the person in this conversation with integrity. Silence crashed over the courtyard. Amara's breath caught painfully inside her chest. Because for the first time since entering Damien Castellano's world, someone powerful had defended her openly, publicly, without shame. Lorenzo's face darkened before he finally shook his head with bitter disbelief. You have changed. Damien glanced back toward Amara then, his pale blue eyes softer than she had ever seen them. Yes, he answered quietly. I have. Lorenzo left moments later, his vehicle disappearing back through the iron gates into the snowy Chicago darkness. But the silence he left behind lingered heavily across the estate grounds. Damien remained standing beside Amara beneath the pale winter dawn while security slowly relaxed around them. She looked up at him carefully. You did not have to do that. Damien slid one hand into the pocket of his overcoat against the freezing wind. Yes, he said softly. I did. The honesty in his voice wrapped around her heart with terrifying warmth. Inside the mansion, staff members quietly resumed moving through the hallways as dawn light slowly filled the enormous estate. But nothing felt the same anymore. Not the marble floors. Not the chandeliers. Not the whispered conversations that followed them both now. Because Amara Bennett was no longer invisible inside this house. She was no longer just the Black Maid who accidentally discovered a dangerous secret beneath the mansion. Somewhere between fear, loyalty, and the impossible softness hidden. Inside a dangerous man, she had become something else entirely. Someone the most feared man in Chicago would protect without hesitation. And as Damien Castellano stood beside her watching the sunrise spill across the snow-covered city below them, one truth became impossible to ignore. In a world ruled by power and fear, the only person capable of changing the Mafia Boss had been the woman everyone else overlooked.